Good evening and a warm welcome to all the viewers across the globe who have joined us today for this webinar. I am Avinash Singh and on behalf of Neolife, the Oncology Division of RPG Life Sciences, I welcome everyone to this exciting webinar on recent trends in management of advanced adenocarcinoma of lung and palliative care in advanced lung cancer. It's my privilege today to introduce you to our esteemed panel of speakers today, highly renowned and respected personalities, Dr. Boman Dabar and Dr. Khurshid Mistry. Dr. Boman Dabar is a medical oncologist and hematologist in Mumbai. Sir has completed his MBBS and later his MD Internal Medicine from Mumbai University and then pursued his super specialization training in medical oncology and hemato-oncology at Tata Memorial Hospital. Dabar sir has done his fellowship from Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, Washington, USA, and from the Cancer University of Texas, USA. Also, sir has received certification from prestigious European Society of Medical Oncology. Talking about sir's previous association, he was the president of Mumbai Urological Society in 2003, president of West Zones section of Urological Society of India in year 2005, and president of Urological Society of India in year 2015. Sir has also published many national as well as international articles in international journals. Currently, Dabar sir is associated as a consultant of medical and hemato-oncology in DNB Onco Center, Bridge Candy Hospital, Jaslok Hospital, Wockhardt Hospital, and Fortis Cancer Institute in Mumbai. So welcome sir and thank you for joining us today. Also, we have with us very humble personality, Dr. Khurshid Mistry ma'am. Dr. Khurshid ma'am has completed her doctorate in molecular biology, prior to which she has done her master's in cytogenetic from Tata Memorial Hospital. She has also worked in the field of oncology for several years and has also done a postgraduate diploma in clinical research. Ma'am has a passion and experience for working with cancer-related NGOs, and currently she is a trustee of NK Dabar Cancer Foundation and has been instrumental in setting up and running of OnCare, which is a cancer wellness and palliative care center, and also NK Dabar Cancer Foundation's latest venture. So thank you, ma'am, and welcome, and thank you for joining us. With such an esteemed panel of doctors, along with their years of expertise they possess, it would be an enriching experience for the medical fraternity to listen to this session. Dr. Bowman sir would be taking us through the medical management part, whereas Khurshid ma'am, she would be taking us through the palliative care part. So without wasting any further time, a warm welcome to both our speakers, and I would request Bowman sir to please carry forward the session. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and thank you for the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak on recent trends in management of advanced lung adenocarcinoma. Just one correction, that I was not a president, otherwise everything else is okay. So just to give you what is the incidence of lung cancer in India, the Globocon data of 2018 shows that lung cancer is the fourth commonest cancer in India, which includes both the sexes and all ages. It constitutes to 5.9% of the incidence of lung cancer, where breast, which is one of the most common cancer, constitutes 14%. If you see the incidence and mortality, this is one of the rare cancers where if you see the mortality is higher than the incidence. See, if the incidence is 6.45, the mortality is 8.82. So this is still considered, even with all the recent advances, a dreadful disease. In male, it is second to oral cavity malignancies in India, whereas in females, it's the fourth commonest cancer in India. We all know the risk factors for lung cancer. Tobacco, smoking heads the list, followed by exposure to radiation. Aging itself is a risk factor for most of the cancers, so it is for lung cancer also. Pollution, radon gas, which is the gas seen in very empty rooms and which is excreted from the ground, is also a very high risk factor for lung cancer. Patients who have disease of the lung obviously would have a high incidence like COPD. If your genes are bad, if you cannot metabolize the carcinogens that you take, you develop cancer fast. So this happens in lung cancer also. And there are some more theoretical causes of lung cancer like minors, Asbestosis, we all know, although we know asbestosis is classically associated with mesothelioma. So we know lung cancer is not one disease. There are major two types of lung cancers. Broad classification we call as small cell and non-small cell. The small cell constitutes 10 to 15%, whereas non-small cell is 80 to 85%. Within this 80 to 85% of non-small cell lung cancer, we have adenocarcinoma, we have squamous cell carcinoma, and the large cell carcinoma are the three broad variants of non-small cell lung cancer. Today, we will be restricting our talk mainly to adenocarcinoma of the lung. This is just to show you the same thing in a pie diagram, where adenocarcinoma constitutes approximately 40% of all lung cancers. So if a patient who is suspected, who comes with a mass in the lung on an X-ray, what are the thoughts as an oncologist we would have? As I told you, first thing we have to differentiate. Our aim is to differentiate whether it's a small cell or a non-small cell, because they are two biologically very different diseases. What is the stage of the disease? What are the molecular characteristics of this cancer? Because molecular characteristics tells us the biology of the disease, how this disease is going to behave, and what are the therapeutic implications, and which I'll show you in my subsequent slides. And of course, we have to see the patient's overall medical condition. For example, his performance status, his comorbidities, what treatment we are going to plan, is the patient going to tolerate? So these are all the things on the basis of which we further investigate the patient. This is just a very broad classification of lung cancer. Stage 1 is, as you can see, a disease in the lung without nodes. Means nodes are everywhere, but without lymph node affection. Here, as you can see, a malignant disease with lymph node affection. It could be intrapulmonary or hilar nodes. When the involvement goes to the mediastinum, it becomes stage 3A, and on the same side is ipsilateral is stage 3A. When it crosses and goes to the opposite mediastinum, it is stage 3B, and stage 4 is obviously a disseminated metastatic disease. The favorite sites of metastasis of lung cancer is the opposite lung, the suprarenal or the adrenal glands, bones, and the brain are the very common disease where the disease spreads. Liver is also one of the sites. Staging is very important, as I told you, because staging gives us the 5-year survival. Early stage, we see the survival going up to 70%, stage 1. As the stage advances, the 5-year survival goes on decreasing. And as you can see, it's in stage 4, only 1 to 3% of the patients survive 5 years. Well, these are old statistics. There have been recent advances, and in recent advances, we do see patients who survive 5 years also. In early stage, surgery is the backbone of treatment, and as the stage advances, we have to add one more modality to the treatment. Like in stage 2, after surgery, most of the patients require adjuvant therapy, and the adjuvant therapy is after any definite local treatment. When we give any treatment, it is called as adjuvant. And in lung, it is most of the time we give chemotherapy. So after surgery, when we give any chemotherapy, it's adjuvant. So as the stage advances, more modalities of treatment come into picture. If you see in stage 3, it is neoadjuvant chemotherapy. That is, before surgery, we give chemotherapy to downstage the disease, operate, surgery if possible, and following surgery, give further chemotherapy, that is adjuvant chemotherapy. Stage 3A and stage 3B, mainly there are other forms of treatment also, like chemoradiation both together. And nowadays, of course, after chemoradiation, we have maintenance therapy of 1 year with an immunological agent called durvalumab. Stage 4 is an advanced disease where we give chemotherapy plus biological agents, which I'll show you in my subsequent slides. So what are our goals of patient management in advanced non-small cell lung cancer? Our goal is we want to prolong the survival of our patient. We want to maintain a good quality of life so that the treatment should not be worse than the disease, minimize the side effects due to treatment. And of course, we know in a metastatic adenocarcinoma of the lung, generally it's not a curative treatment. Generally it's not a curative treatment. Our intention is to palliate the patient. So what are the key factors that influence the choice of initial therapy for advanced non-small cell lung cancer? So the key factors which, on the basis of which we decide which treatment to be given, is whether in, as I told you, non-small cell lung cancer, we have squamous and adenocarcinoma, there is squamous versus non-squamous. So our aim, once we know that this is a non-small cell lung cancer, we want to know whether it's squamous or adenocarcinoma, because histology tells us which treatment to be given. The extent of the disease, as I told you, depending on the stage, we decide what treatment to be given. If it's an advanced metastatic disease, whether the patient is symptomatic because of the advanced disease. Just for example, if the patient has CNS disease, like a disease in mets in the spine, and it is painful mets, or he is developing a neurological problem, so our treatment is first directed to that. That is through radiation or operate and remove the compression on the cord. Or if the patient is metastatic disease in the brain and he is symptomatic because of brain metastasis, we would first go on for radiation. So symptoms also tell us what treatment to be started first. As I told you earlier, we would like to know the molecular characteristics of the disease. So there are some driver mutations. The driver mutations we call that those are the pathways of carcinogenesis. And those pathways of carcinogenesis are EGFR, ALK, ROS. Now we have got some more like BRAF. So we have to identify, is that patient having a driver mutation? Because our treatment will totally depend on that. Now, everybody talks about immunological agent. So whether this patient is suitable for immunological agent or not. So what we do is we have to send a tumor for PD-L1 expression. That is programmed that ligand 1. If the PD-L1 expression is high, these are the patients in whom we have to think of immunological agents also. So these are the 4 basic things on the basis of which the next treatment we try to plan. So this is just to tell you this different forms of systemic therapy for non-small cell lung cancer. This depends on mainly these 3. Histology, as I told you, is it squamous or non-squamous means adenocarcinoma. So histology will tell us which chemotherapy to be given. If molecular characteristics, which I told you, so we try to identify the driver mutations. If there are any driver mutations, these patients go for targeted therapy. And most of these targeted therapy are in the form of tablets, which we call as tyrosine kinase inhibitors. PD-L1 expression, as I told you, is for immunological agents. If PD-L1 expression is high, most of our patients will go for immunological agents depending on the driver mutations. This is just to make it interesting, a case study. A 62-year-old female who was a non-smoker came to our clinic with history of cough and hemoptysis. X-ray chest showed a large left pulmonary mass. Or what we call as ECOG performance status was very good. Except for cough and hemoptysis, she could do all her routine daily activities. So we call it as ECOG 0. She had no fever, no weight loss. This is her X-ray, as you can see, a big mass. So nothing can substitute a proper clinical evaluation. So obviously we did a good clinical evaluation and further investigations when such a big patient comes are what we would do. Obviously our laboratory investigations like complete blood count, liver functions, creatinine. We all know CA is a marker for colonic or GI tract malignancy. Many times we see CA also high in lung malignancy. So I generally do once a CA level just to see if it is high and we use as a follow-up marker. PET CT scan is now become a trend. PET CT scan I'll show you in my subsequent slides how it helps. If it's an advanced disease or if the patient is going for surgery, MRI of the brain is also one of the very important investigations. And ECG and 2D echo to see the fitness of the patient, whether he can withstand our chemotherapy and surgery if we are planning for surgery. So taking this case further, we did a PET CT scan, and PET CT scan, why we do it? PET CT scan is generally done for a patient generally in an early stage as well as in an advanced stage. In an early stage, we do to see if the mediastinum or there are any ipsilateral metastatic disease. If there is a disease mediastinum on the opposite mediastinum, the patient's state becomes an inoperable disease, or he has metastasis in the bone or anywhere else. And apart from anatomical details, it also tells us the functional details of the mass or the malignancy, what you see, or the abnormality you see on the scan. So it's important part of our routine investigation in lung malignancy, do a PET CT. Tissue diagnosis is the most important thing because always we say tissue is the issue. So how do we get the tissue? No longer one should be doing any FNACs. You should always do a true cut biopsy, and it is always important to do multiple cores. Why? Because in an FNAC you cannot get the architecture, you get only cells. If you get cells, they may tell you that it's a small cell or a non-small cell. That is not enough nowadays to treat, because the science has advanced and that's what I told you, that you would like to know the mutation, you would like to know the PD-L1, so many things you would like to know from the tissue. This is all done on the tissue basis only. Hence, one should take always a true cut biopsy and multiple codes. Now, how and where will we do the true cut biopsy? Just to give you an example, if it's a central lesion, we generally do a bronchoscopic biopsy. If it's a peripheral lesion, it's a CT-guided true cut biopsy. So we do a biopsy, and there, as you can see, this is the architecture, how a small cell lung cancer would look. And here, as you can see, the cells are larger, and hence it's an adenocarcinoma. Again, to differentiate that, it's very now differentiate between adeno or squamous. It's very important for us to do what is called as immunohistochemistry. Immunohistochemistry, these are the immunohistochemical markers for adenocarcinoma, TTF1, mucin, and napsin. If they are positive, we call it adenocarcinoma, and this is small squamous cell carcinoma. Immunohistochemistry shows P40 positive or CK4 or 6 positivity are the immunohistochemical markers for squamous cell carcinoma. So why is histology important? As I told you, if it's an adenocarcinoma, patient goes for a different type of chemotherapy regimen. And if it's a squamous cell carcinoma, they go for a different type of regimen. For adenocarcinoma, they go for pemetrexed and a platinum group of drug. For squamous, this is either gemcitabine or taxanes. Taxanes are docetaxel or nab-paclitaxel, of course, along with platinum group of drug. Now coming to targeted therapy, the molecular characteristics of the disease. Why is it important? Just to show a brief background of that. Now, there are many pathways which are functioning in a malignant cell or in a normal cell also. One of this pathway, our molecular biologists have been able to crack, is the EGFR pathway. That is the epithelial growth factor receptor pathway. Now, epithelial growth factor receptor pathway, as I'll just show you, has two receptors, as receptors, and this is a ligand. And this is the extracellular component of the EGFR pathway, and there is an intracellular component of the EGFR pathway. So what happens, as you can see here, when the ligand comes in contact with the receptor, the extracellular part of the receptor, there is what we call as, once the whole pathway gets activated, there is homodimerization. The two EGFR receptors come together and they homodimerize and they activate intracellularly. Multiple kinases are activated, by which ultimately these activity go down into the nucleus and they tell the nucleus to undergo proliferation and improve survival, which are the properties of a cancer cell. So this is a whole pathway which is functioning in the cancer cells as well as the normal cells. So we have to block this pathway in malignant cells. And how do we do that? If we block this pathway outside the cell, this we do by what we call as MABs, monoclonal antibodies. One of the drugs that we use is called cetuximab, which functions to block this pathway extracellularly. Now, intracellularly, if we have to block this pathway, we have what is called as tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So when we use these, the whole pathway gets blocked intracellularly. And in lung, what we have are multiple now tyrosine kinase inhibitors. These are just the first line what we have, erlotinib and geftinib. These are the ones which block the pathway intracellularly, and thereby the whole EGFR pathway gets blocked, and hence there is no proliferation, no invasion, no inhibition, no metastasis. So the properties of malignancies are cut down, and the malignancy comes under control. So all our guidelines, the ASCO guidelines, the ESMO guidelines, the NCCN guidelines, all tell us that we should try to identify these mutation characteristics, whether they are present. Because if these characteristics are present, we can straight use drugs which block these pathways. As I told you, they are called as tyrosine kinase inhibitors. Now how to identify? These are what we call as exon 18 to 21 are where there are mutations present. And when these mutations are present, we can use these drugs. Geftinib, erlotinib, afatinib, dacotinib, osimertinib. These are all oral tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So whenever you identify these mutations, it means that this pathway, the EGFR pathway, is over functioning in the cancerous cells. and we need to block this pathway by using these drugs. These are oral tablets only. All over the world, 10 to 15% of the patients are EGFR mutation positive. Fortunately, in Asia, the incidence goes up to 30 to 40% of these patients who have EGFR mutations. As we have more number of patients who are EGFR mutation positive, we have more chance of using these tablet forms of treatment. And most of the mutations that are there in the EGFR, 90% are what we call as an exon 19 or 21. There are multiple trials done all over the world where they have compared a single tablet, either of this geftinib or erlotinib, these are first line, and these are second line afatinib. And when they have compared it with chemotherapy, double agent, as you can see, the PFS is far more with single agent rather than even chemotherapy. Hence, it is all over the world now a must that all EGFR mutated patients should receive these EGFR tyrosine kinase inhibitors. So as I told you, now we have got first line, geftinib, erlotinib, we have got second line, and we have got most recent ones are the osimertinib and dacomtinib. What I told you was of this one pathway, EGFR. Fortunately, our scientists now have been able to crack down multiple pathways. One of them is ALK, ROS1, HER2, MET, RET, and FGFR. Up to these three, and one more pathway actually is there, which I not shown in this slide, is the BRAF. Of these four pathways, if any pathway is functioning in the tumor tissue, first line we can use drugs to block these pathways, and most of these are tablets forms. This what I told you is the EML4 ALK fusion oncogene, which arises from the short arm of chromosome 2. Because of this fusion oncogene, it forms a protein called EML4 ALK protein, and it is this protein, as you can see, causes the process of carcinogenesis. So if this EML4 ALK pathway is functioning in the patient, then now we have drugs to block this pathway. We have similarly another pathway called the ROS1 pathway. Unfortunately, only 1% of the patient will have this ROS1 rearrangement present in the non-small cell lung cancer. And now these are some of the drugs. ALK is present in 3 to 7% of patients of adenocarcinoma, whereas ROS1 is quite present in 1 to 2% of patients of adenocarcinoma. And now we have a host of drugs against ALK pathway to block this pathway, the crizotinib, ceritinib, alectinib. For the ROS1 pathway, we have one more. We have a similar drug which works for ALK, that is crizotinib. Now, as I told you, all over the world, it's just 15 to 20%, whereas in Asia, around 30 to 40% of the patients are positive. But what happens to those whom these mutations are absent? What do we do? For those patients, we have two modalities of treatment: the anti-angiogenic agent, that is the VEGF inhibitor called bevacizumab, and of course, the most recent and the most commonly used now is the immunotherapy. And for immunotherapy, as I told you, we have to do a test to see how much is the PD-L1 expression. Is it low or is it high? So for driver mutation absent, the backbone of treatment is chemotherapy or immunotherapy. Anti-angiogenic drug is an add-on treatment to chemotherapy. Now, when do we use immunotherapy? Immunotherapy may be a very effective option if more than 50% of the tumor cells express PD-L1. In this group of patients, even a single agent called pembrolizumab works and shows good results. And mind you, immunotherapy are the drugs which are given intravenously, but very well tolerated. So what is this immunotherapy? Immunotherapy is a treatment that changes your immune system only, that your immune system fights with the disease and brings the cancer under control. And we have got two broad ranges of immunotherapy, one which we call a CTLA-4 blocker and the PD-L1 blockade. Here in adenocarcinoma, we have mainly PD-L1 blockade. Recently, of course, one of the CTLA-4 blockade also has been approved. The three PD-L1 blockers which have been approved as a part of immunotherapy in adenocarcinoma of the lung are nivolumab, pembrolizumab, and atezolizumab. Now, as I told you, we would first thing as the patient comes, we try to assess the mutations are present, these patients go for directly oral tyrosine kinase inhibitors, those are those tablets. If they show high PDL1 expression, a single agent pembrolizumab works. If there is low PDL1 expression, that is less than 50, one would consider either pembrolizumab alone or pembrolizumab with chemotherapy. If the tumor burden is high and if we want to downstage the disease fast, we generally would use a combination of pembrolizumab plus chemotherapy. And the chemotherapy backbone, as you know, and as I told you earlier, for squamous cell carcinoma, it is gemcitabine or paclitaxel or taxanes. And for adenocarcinoma, it is mainly pemetrexed. So initial therapy, as I told you, is chemotherapy. If a patient is not suitable for pembrolizumab or immunotherapy because of some autoimmune problems, one could consider adding chemotherapy with bevacizumab as an additional thing, and you get still better results when a targeted therapy is added to chemotherapy. The important thing is here that when we have given chemotherapy 4 to 6 courses, there is a concept of maintenance therapy also. If the patient is on bevacizumab, there is a role of maintenance bevacizumab. In fact, when we are using only chemotherapy also, that is pemetrexed and carboplatinum for adenocarcinoma, we use single agent pemetrexed as maintenance. If the patient is on pembrolizumab also, as I told you, chemotherapy with immunological agent, we would add pemetrexed with pembrolizumab as a maintenance therapy. So many patients or the relatives may come to you and ask, "Arey, doctor, sir, I have finished 4 cycles. Now why you want to continue? Patient is doing well." But maintenance has shown to do grossly improve the progression-free survival, and there are studies where they have shown improvement in survival also. So maintenance therapy is also a very important part of our treatment. So this is just to give you a brief treatment algorithm for advanced non-small cell lung cancer. So as I told you, if there are any mutations that are known oncogenic drivers like EGFR, ALK, ROS, they all go for first-line targeted therapy and maintenance or salvage therapy. If there are no proven targeted therapies, they go for generally chemotherapy. If there is absence of driver mutation, most of the time they would go for chemotherapy. This was just few years back till the immunological agents came. Now, once the immunological agents have come in, what we do is, if the action driver mutations are present, obviously the first choice is always targeted agents. That is, as I told you, oral tyrosine kinase inhibitors. If the immunological test, that is PDL1, is positive, and if it is more than 50%, they will straight go for pembrolizumab. If PDL1 is less than 50, then obviously you see whether it's squamous or adenocarcinoma, and depending on that, we decide the backbone of chemotherapy. But immunological agents, if possible, we should be giving along with chemotherapy. Why I'm saying if possible? Because most of these drugs are very expensive. And once we have started that, all these patients go for maintenance pembrolizumab. If we have received pemetrexed, they will receive pemetrexed along with target therapy. If we have used bevacizumab, we use bevacizumab plus other targeted therapy plus the chemotherapy as a maintenance therapy. So to conclude, lung cancer, we know, is a heterogeneous disease. Most of the advances that have occurred now in non-small cell lung cancer is adenocarcinoma. The therapeutic management of non-small cell adenocarcinoma of the lung depends on the histologic diagnosis, because histology, as I told you, tells us which chemotherapy backbone we are going to use, and histological diagnosis is done on the basis of IHC, which I showed you. Molecular profiling is very important because we have to identify driver mutation, which I showed you. All the guidelines tell us to do that. Is it EGFR, or is it ALK, or is it ROS, or now we say BRAF. And one more test we always do is a PDL1 expression on the tumor tissue. And hence, always remember to do a true cut biopsy, because FNAC cannot tell us these things. If we have driver mutation positive, which in our Asian countries is approximately 30 to 40%, all of these patients go for oral tyrosine kinase inhibitors. These are tablets, depending on which mutation is positive. If the mutation is negative, and if the PDL1 expression is high, they all go for chemotherapy with an immunological agent. We have now second line effective drugs also for those who have this mutation positive disease. As I told you, we have first line mutation drugs, we have got second line mutation drugs. So if the tyrosine kinase inhibitors we have used first line, we go for now next line of drugs also. So effectively, advanced stage non-small cell adenocarcinoma has now become a chronic disease with so many treatment options. Thank you very much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Boman sir. Thank you for explaining us in detail. Now I would ask Khurshid ma'am to please carry forward the session. She can. So Khurshid ma'am will be taking us through palliative care. Over to you, ma'am. Thanks.
So thank you very much. And I would like to really thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to talk on this extremely important but often neglected topic of palliative care. So as we have learned in our Hippocratic oath, that we may be able to cure sometimes, but we often treat, but comfort care can always be given. If we come down to the definition of what is palliative care, the WHO defines it as an approach that improves the quality of life of not just the patient, but also their families who are facing any life-limiting disorder. And this can be done through the prevention of suffering, prevention of symptom relief, and a holistic approach of the physical, psychosocial, and the spiritual approach. Now, often we have misunderstood this term palliative, and we often think that it is only used during end-of-life care, or it is only used when no other treatment is possible, then you should resort to palliative care. But I would like to, at the beginning, say that this is a myth, because palliative care can and should start at the time of diagnosis. So in any basic essential of care, when we are talking of care, it includes the psychological support, the physical symptom relief, and this whole thing has to be done through open, transparent method and through teamwork and partnership. So we have to remember that, as we have already heard Dr. Dabar saying, that advancing cancers, they go through so many transitions. So right from the time of diagnosis, we start with at every transition, we have to go through a different philosophy of giving care. So the first is always the best interest, helping in the decision making, let it be a joint decision making. There are always conflicts which come through. Patients realize, sometimes go through futility. They feel, oh, we've done so much and yet nothing has happened. And at the end of the stage, they decide whether they want to go in for resuscitation or palliative sedation. And then, of course, at the end, when it comes to death and bereavement, where not again like just after the patient has gone, palliative care yet stays on with the family to give them support through the times and after death of the loved ones. So if we come to the introduction, and we've already heard Dr. Dabar saying that patients with lung cancer are definitely with a life-limiting disorder, and the 5-year survival is abysmal. It's really less, and hence an early palliative care intervention would definitely improve the quality of life. It would decrease the symptom burden of the patient. It definitely addresses their psychological issues, which in turn would lead to a lesser aggressive and a more bearable disease progression for the patient and the family. So if you come to see a model of care, there is one model which is addressed towards the patient and the other towards the caregiver, but all of them will definitely have a multidisciplinary approach where you would look into the physical, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual care. You would talk of tobacco cessation, you would give them a lot of counseling, a lot of social work interventions. And hence the management part, when we come down to the management, we have to remember that it has to be a multidisciplinary care model. So again, it could be pharmacological interventions, non-pharmacological interventions. In many cases, yes, even chemotherapy, radiation are used as palliative measures, but it has to be a multidisciplinary process and throughout the entire trajectory of the illness. It has to be a holistic management where we are not just looking at the physical, but also the psychological, the social, and the spiritual aspects of it. The basic principles of palliative care are correct the correctables, help the patients, as I said already, use non-pharmacological and pharmacological measures, and use prophylactic prescription, anticipatory prescriptions, preempt what is going to happen. And an extremely important aspect of palliative care, which is communication, which not only helps the patient understand the disease trajectory, but also prepares the patient and the family for the eventuality. So coming down to symptom management, when we are talking of the physical aspect, now in any cancer, and mostly lung cancer, we would see that the symptoms would be either disease related or they would be treatment related. As Dr. Davar has mentioned, there are so many different treatment options, but some of them are more toxic, some are less toxic, but yet they have some amount of problems relating from the treatment itself, and the concurrent disorders or other causes. Some of the very commonly seen causes, symptoms in lung cancer especially, are dyspnea, cough, hemoptysis, and anxiety, which I'll be going through each of them and how we can help the patient deal with each of them a little later. And of course, any other symptoms which are associated with most cancers, and definitely advanced lung cancer, would be pain, constipation, fatigue, lack of appetite, insomnia, etc. So coming to the most commonly seen symptom in advanced lung cancer is breathlessness or dyspnea. Now, how would you treat that? So after going through the laboratory investigations, our target is to correct the correctable. Whatever is the problem, if there's an airway obstruction, deal with that. So let's get into the non-pharmacological measures first, because the pharmacological measures, I think everybody knows and uses very often, but it's the non-pharmacological measures which are often forgotten, and they are really very effective. So even just simple thing like enhancing the ventilation in the room, or blowing air directly on the face of the patient, positioning of the patient, like leaning forward, arms resting, avoiding pressure on the chest and abdomen. And this often what happens is when a patient is breathless, the patient tends to get tensed and hence gets cramped up more, and it leads to further breathlessness. So the positioning of the patient is very important. Using loose and comfortable clothing. There are certain techniques of breathing which a respiratory therapist often helps to deal with these things. There's a pursed lip breathing technique. Minimizing fatigue by using equipments and aids like walkers, wheelchairs, that would reduce the breathlessness in a patient. Modification of activities, wherever the patient's level of tolerance is low, you take help in doing those certain tasks. Distraction techniques often help, like reading, music, etc. And very often certain therapies like music therapy, massages, visualization techniques have shown proven to be very effective in releasing of breathlessness or decreasing breathlessness. Coming back to the pharmacological measures, the mainstays, of course, are the bronchodilators that are often used, oxygen, which is often used, and the corticosteroids, which definitely help and will improve the symptoms of the patient. Also, morphine, very often when we come to later stage disease, people don't seem to think of morphine as a measure for breathlessness. So it is definitely a choice of palliation of dyspnea and advanced diseases. But the important thing here is the individual titration of the dose and the use of antiemetics and laxatives as a prophylactic measure while using morphine. As I have already mentioned, that when you're breathless, it's a cyclic thing. Like, when breathlessness leads to increased anxiety, which leads to panic, and which leads to increased breathlessness. So, of course, counseling and other measures help. But if you have to resort to pharmacological measures again, anti-anxiety medicines, antidepressants definitely help the patient symptomatically. The second most commonly seen symptom in lung cancer is cough. And this can really drive the patient crazy. It even causes a lot of distress to the entire family, because when they see their loved ones coughing incessantly and not being able to breathe, it definitely becomes a cause of concern. So definitely going through the laboratory investigations, correcting the correctables, coming down to the non-pharmacological measures in general, again, the posture, very, very important. Counseling, just talking to the patients, reducing the anxiety helps. Tobacco cessation, a very important part of this entire process, improving ventilation. If the sputum is thick and viscous, steam inhalations help, nebulization helps, chest physiotherapy definitely helps. If the sputum is purulent, you again would get the help of a chest physiotherapist or a respiratory therapist. Postural drainage definitely decreases the load of coughing. And if the secretions are loose, but your patient is yet unable to cough out, positioning and controlled breathing techniques again help a lot. Coming down to the pharmacological measures, the dry coughs, antitussives remain the mainstay. For productive cough, acetylcysteine and ambroxol are often used, again, to release the symptom burden. Another extremely terrifying symptom of lung cancer is hemoptysis or bleeding. Now, in here, again, it's just through simple counseling and communication. If the patients are warned that this can happen, it could reduce the anxiety in the patients. Now, if there is minor bleeding, by maintaining open airways, it helps. Using a head down position to allow the drainage of blood helps. If infection is the cause of hemoptysis, it has to be treated with antibiotics. And although even cough suppressants would help in hemoptysis. In acute cases where the bleeding is severe, again, the caregiver has to be told to be prepared for this, and anticipatory planning has to be taken into account. Emergency contact numbers of hospitals should be given. Dark towels. Now, this helps because of visual thing. When a patient sees the red blood on a white towel, it gets them more anxious. So you use dark towels where the blood actually cannot be seen so much. Call for resuscitation if it is required, and telephonic support. So immediate hospitalization, immediate ambulance support is extremely important in these cases. Now, as I've mentioned, all these different things which require to be done are done in one of our centers, which is called OnCare, which has been started by the N.K. Dabar Cancer Foundation. Now here, as I've already mentioned, we use an extremely multidisciplinary team where we have palliative care physicians who take care of all the pharmacological needs and the medical needs of the patient. We have counselors who talk to the patients, calm them down. We have all sorts of therapists, starting from the physiotherapist to occupational therapists, respiratory therapists, which are extremely important for the patient and the caregivers, and a nutritionist who gives nutritional support because very often patients cannot eat, they lack proper nutrition. This again results in further fatigue and discomfort to the patients. So proper nutrition, proper health, proper care is extremely important, and all these facilities are available at OnCare. We also use a very holistic approach to this, where we use different techniques like yoga. Now again, in yoga, when you do a pranayam, where you are taught certain breathing techniques, this definitely helps the lung cancer patients. Art therapy, music and movement therapy, these are all therapies which have been proven scientifically with evidence to help the patients to relax and to help them to cope with the disease better. And since we are living in the world of evidence-based medicine, we really have a lot of evidence where in several papers and research, we've seen that patients who start with early palliative care in any advanced cancer, especially lung cancer, they not only improve the quality of the life significantly, and it improves the life and mood of the patients and their families, but it also increases the prognosis and the lifespan of the patient. The survival also increases with good palliative care. Again, just another example of another paper which also shows that early palliative care is associated with better survival in patients with advanced lung cancer. And we have some of our own Indian research done at the Tata Memorial Hospital in conjunction with the palliative care department and the lung cancer department, where they have definitely seen an improvement in the patients and the families' quality of life and also the survival rate. So in summary, if I had to say, the palliative care should be definitely instituted as an early part of an interdisciplinary care, and especially in patients with life-threatening illnesses, especially lung cancer and an advanced lung cancer, where the survival is anyways very short. Determining the cause of symptoms and effectiveness of the therapeutic intervention. Incorporation, as I have been saying this again and again, because we've definitely seen that pharmacological measures are always used, but the non-pharmacological measures are very often neglected, but they should not, because it definitely helps in a better quality of life of the patient. And using a very holistic management, incorporating the physical part of it, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual aspects of an individual. So thank you very much for a patient hearing.
Thank you, Khursheed ma'am, for very beautifully explaining about the palliative care. Thank you to both the panels. What we will do is, now we will take question and answers. I would request the doctors who have joined us to type any questions if they have. Also, ma'am, we have some questions in our chat box, WhatsApp box. Should I read it for you?
Yes, sure.
The first question is, what are the process which is covered in palliative care? Is it just psychological or medical also?
No, so I've already mentioned it's definitely the medical also, because as I said, it's symptom relief. So if there, it's not only we can even use certain chemotherapy measures or radiation therapy measures to control the disease. So it's basically supportive care which is given. So if, like as I've already addressed, there are so many different symptoms due to the disease itself, which are addressed in palliative care. So definitely a medical approach is there. It's not only counseling and psychosocial.
Dr. Rao is asking, in which type of patient should we prefer immunological agent? Sir, I think question is for you.
The most preferred is in adenocarcinoma, although there is an evidence even in squamous cell carcinoma, first line immunological agents work. The benefit in adenocarcinoma may be slightly more than in squamous, but in both them, whenever there is a PD-L1 expression which is high, if the PD-L1 expression is more than 50%, there is no question if the patient can, I hope you can hear, yeah. If the expression is more than 50%, there is no question that they should all go for immunological agents. If the expression is less than 50, then one would consider single agent or with chemotherapy. The chemotherapy backbone only changes for squamous and adeno, as I told you. But for both non-small cell lung cancer, first line is now immunological agent. Even in small cell, of course, there is an evidence now that adding an immunological agent to the backbone of treatment that we usually use, etoposide platinum, has shown an improvement in overall survival also.
Dr. Sanjay is asking, sir, when do you use immunotherapy in your daily practice and in which type of patients?
Immunotherapy now has come in a big way in oncology, in a big way. Most of the time, the commonest cancer that we use is in lung cancer. Of course, it is now approved in melanoma, but this is not a very common cancer in India. But in malignant melanoma also, it is approved as a first-line treatment. In adenocarcinoma, as I told you, in squamous cell carcinoma, in lung cancers, in breast cancers, in triple negative, it is now a metastatic disease. If there is expression of PD-L1, we use that. In Hodgkin disease, where there is a relapse, it is used as an upfront therapy. So in multiple malignancies now, immunological therapy has come in a big way.
Ma'am, this question is for you, and I think so that this is very common questions which is asked. She is asking, Miss Pratima is there. She is asking, I have heard that palliative care increases the lifespan up to 1 to 2 years. Is it true?
See, it improves the quality of life. There is some papers do say that it improves because very often it's said that the mind and the body are linked. When a person comes up with a better positive approach to the disease, we've also seen that with good supportive care or palliative care, the compliance to the main treatment increases, which is another reason for a better prognosis or a better survival. Because very often what happens is, like, as I've said, all these different options that we have of chemotherapy, immunotherapy, sometimes it can take a toll on the patient because they are fairly toxic. Some certain therapies are fairly difficult to deal with. So alongside that, if we are giving palliative care, if we are taking care of the symptoms, the compliance to the main treatment, the adherence to the main treatment improves, and hence probably the survival also improves.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for answering that. One more question, ma'am, which is very what we can say. It is also a very common question that when we talk about palliative care, many individuals don't know where to go and where to seek help for it.
Yeah, so actually I have a last slide which I didn't show because it's restricted only to Bombay.
Okay.
In Mumbai itself, we have a palliative care network where there are several government hospitals like Tata Memorial and other hospitals. There are private hospitals. There are NGOs like us who are providing different models of palliative care. So there is home care, like patients who cannot come to us in the terminal stages. We even do home care. We go as a team of a doctor, a nurse, and a counselor, and we go to the patients' houses to provide this care. So there are many models of it. Many government hospitals are now beginning to start with a separate department of palliative care. And a lot of even private corporate hospitals now have realized the importance of palliative care and hence are starting with their own departments. Like, as I said, I can give you a list of palliative care centers in Mumbai. It was amongst one of my slides. I didn't show it because, as I said, it was restricted only to Mumbai. But I can flash it after the questions are over.
No issues, ma'am. We can take it from you and we can share it. No issues.
Yes, exactly.
Sir, one question is from you, Dr. Karthikeyan. He's asking, how common is brain metastasis in SLCLC at presentation? Which driver mutation is common in adenocarcinoma?
I told you the most common driver mutation is what we call as an exon 19 in adenocarcinoma. So that is one of the most commonest mutation that we see. And approximately around at presentation, most of the time in adenocarcinoma, we do see lung metastasis. And if it is a mutation positive disease, there are some drugs which crosses the blood-brain barrier very well, like osimertinib. So if the patient is asymptomatic and he has got brain metastasis, no need to even radiate them, because most of the time when you are using a drug called osimertinib which crosses the blood-brain barrier so well, we don't radiate the patient if they are asymptomatic or if they are small metastasis, and they do very well. Percentage-wise, it will be difficult to quantify, but roughly I would say at presentation around 10 to 15% do have brain metastasis.
Okay. One last question we have, sir. When should bevacizumab be added in the treatment, and whether maintenance therapy is compulsory with it or no?
Yeah. Bevacizumab is given only in adenocarcinomas of the lung, and it is now not a very commonly used agent with the immunological agent coming in. There is a study, which is called as IMpower, where they have used immunological agent with a target therapy, bevacizumab, and they have found to some extent an improvement in survival, but it becomes a very expensive affair to use an immunological agent, to use a targeted therapy called bevacizumab plus chemotherapy. So most of the time nowadays bevacizumab has gone down, the use of it has gone down with the onset of immunological agent. We don't use so much. But yes, once we have started a target therapy like bevacizumab, ideally it should be continued as a maintenance therapy. We don't use bevacizumab for squamous cell carcinoma, that is when there are central lesions, because of the risk of bleeding. So whenever a patient has hemoptysis, venous thrombosis, bevacizumab goes out.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Questions are over. Thank you for taking the questions.
Okay.
Any concluding remark from your side? First, I would like to ask, sir.
Yeah, this is just to tell you that now lung cancer has evolved so much that when we were registrars, We had only one chemotherapy agent at that time called mitomycin cisplatin. This was, say, roughly 25 years back. And any patient coming with lung cancer above 55 to 60 years, and he had a bad disease, we would just send the patient home saying that just be on supportive care. If we find that he could not tolerate our chemotherapy drugs. Now we have got first line chemotherapy drugs, we have got second line chemotherapy drugs, we have got targeted therapies, we have got first line target therapy, we have got second line and even third line target therapies, we have immunological agent. So what I want to tell you, in the last 20 years, things have evolved so much that lung cancer, where the survival was hardly 6 to 8 months earlier, now we see ourselves, those who have mutation positive disease, survival going into years. So this is what the science has made a difference. And along with palliative care, this whole journey is very smooth for the patient. So that is why what Dr. Khurshid also told us, that if we join this palliative care with our treatment, it's the smoothness, the journey of the patient becomes very smooth.
Thank you, sir. Khurshid ma'am?
Yeah, so I would just like to absolutely agree with Dr. Dabar and say that since we are increasing the lifespan of the patient, it is also important to give them a good quality of life. We are trying to make it into a chronic disease, but you don't want the patient with such a large symptom burden that survival is of no use. So hence, palliative care, supportive care, extremely important with all these different advancements which have been made, and make the life and the journey of the patient and the family as smooth as possible. And I think we are managing to do that fairly well now.
Sure. Once again, thank you Dabar sir and Khurshid ma'am for sharing your valuable time and experience with us. It was a great pleasure to have you both today with us, and we will be eagerly waiting to listen to you in future also. And also thank to all the doctors who have joined us. We are sure this session would be beneficial for you and your colleague in your daily practice. We would be happy to share you the YouTube video of this session only after due permission of both the panels. So if they permit, we can share the video also.
Yeah, we do.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Till the next time we meet, on behalf of Oncology Division of RPG Life Sciences, goodbye, take care, and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.